So, Dina, let's just talk about the importance of digital advertising. I don't know if people really fully grasp how big a part of our economy it is, but how important it is in many respects to the social fabric in a way that I think might surprise people.
Sure. Digital advertising is an incredibly important industry because it's how our news industry and our content producers are largely able to offer content online to consumers for free or at low cost. So, we want to make sure that industry is functioning properly so that more and more content producers and news journalists can offer content for free at a low cost. And in terms of how large it is, the two largest players in the digital advertising industry are Google and Facebook. Google makes over $100 billion a year selling digital advertising, and Facebook makes over $50 billion a year selling digital advertising. And digital advertising is the primary revenue source for almost the entirety of our news industry in America.
And we should also say that when we talk about Google and we talk about Facebook, we are talking about ultimately digital advertising selling companies. I mean, Google gets 86% of their revenue, as you write. Facebook almost entirely, 99%. So that's the business they're in ultimately.
That's correct. Yeah, it's really important to remember that, because when we think of Google, we might think of search, or we might think of other Google products. We think of Facebook, we think of this free social network, but actually almost the entirety of their revenues comes from selling one, very narrow product, and that's digital advertising.
And when we talk about the growth in this market, this was fascinating. You wrote that the online ad market as a whole is growing. Expected year-over-year growth is 20%, that's big. That's a pretty steep curve. But outside of Google and Facebook and a couple others, the rest of the market, which includes thousands and thousands of independent news publishers, will shrink by 11%. So to the extent that the revenues and the size of this market is growing, it really isn't. It's really just Facebook and Google that is growing.
That's right.
Okay, so you write that it's super important for us to understand this dynamic, and why does knowing how digital advertising is sold, why is that important in our understanding of these companies relative to the question of antitrust?
Well, the companies currently are under investigation either by U.S. Congress, the Federal Trade Commission, or the Department of Justice for violations of antitrust laws. And regulators are going to need to, and the press is going to need to start covering these topics in deeper fashion to get to the heart of what the competition issues are in the industry. But as we do that, we'll also notice a couple of other intersections with other conversations we're having nationally, and one of those is the intersection with how consumers are demanding more privacy, right? So we're considering federal privacy legislation for consumers. We're passing at the state level various state laws that protect consumers' privacy online, and when I say protect consumers' privacy online, I'm really referring to one narrow thing, which is consumers' desire to stop being tracked, right? So back in the early 2000s, we used to get lots of telemarketing calls at home. We passed federal legislation. We allowed consumers to opt out of that nonsense, and we reverted sort of time and peace in the household back to Americans. And we have a similar structural problem right now, where you have these online advertising companies that are tracking you not just on their own site, like Facebook is not just tracking you on Facebook.com and on the Facebook app, but actually it's tracking you and recording your behavior on millions and millions and millions of independent sites and apps that have nothing to do with Facebook. And this feels very invasive from just a surveillance perspective, right? And so consumers are increasingly demanding the right to opt out of this privacy intrusion. And the reason why the companies do this and what they are doing is part of the antitrust conversation at the same time.
And well, I want to talk about that link in just a second. But if I don't care about the tracking, like I don't care if Facebook knows that I want to get a new couch or something like that. There's still another whole set of issues from an antitrust perspective, and how it impacts me as both a consumer and as a citizen in a multitude of ways. But let's address that question of how does the privacy, how is that implicated by the antitrust question?
Sure. So we can answer this question from two different perspectives. From the consumer's perspective, whenever you have a company that has a lot of market power in the market, they might take advantage of that power by increasing price or decreasing quality. And those two concepts are really flip sides of the same coin. Now, in Facebook and Google's case, the price is free, and that has stayed constant. But the level and the amount of surveillance that they are conducting on you as a condition for you using their services is continuing to increase and has progressively increased drastically over time. Now, you may not mind it, but that's really a question that, for example, gets litigated. Because even when you have the prices of products increase in a market, you're always going to have some people say, well, I don't really mind that the price went up because they kind of tweaked the color and I like this color better, right? So it's a fact question that can still get litigated and is not a moot issue just because a subset of the population doesn't mind it. And the reason why I mention that is because we do notice some interesting trends nationally. We see a huge uptick in the number of consumers that are adopting privacy-based browsers that stop tracking. Or try to stop tracking. We see a huge uptick in the number of users that are adopting ad blockers and script blockers because they're trying to escape this tracking. So we have a lot of empirical evidence that suggests that many American consumers and a large chunk of American consumers don't like this, but they really just don't have any other choice right now. Okay. But even if you don't care about that from that perspective, you might still care about the price that you're paying for a New York Times subscription or a Wall Street Journal subscription, or whether you can read your local news site locally for free, or whether they're even still in business, right? So whether you even have access to local news, because we also have a problem nationally with a decline of the sustainability of independent and local news journalism. And the market needs to work for them too, so that you as a consumer can access their services at low cost. And this might get kind of confusing.
Well, wait a second. Before we get to this part, let's take a quick break here. We will stop here at with the premise that the lack of privacy that we are subject to at the hands of Google and Facebook is not just a question of privacy. I may be perfectly comfortable with Google and Facebook knowing what kind of dog food I want to buy or whether I'm in the market for a couch. But the problem is it fundamentally undercuts a whole host of other services that I may want in the future and makes them less viable. We will explain that when we return. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be right back after this.